The COP15 Biodiversity Conference is underway in Montreal, Canada. Delegates from around the world are trying to hammer out a deal to protect nature and the benefits it provides to people. How are negotiations on the new biodiversity framework going? What are the controversies and obstacles? And how is China exercising its role in guiding these talks? I spoke with Craig Hanson, Managing Director and Executive Vice President for Programs at World Resources Institute. He is in Montreal to participate in this global biodiversity summit. How do you feel about the atmosphere at the meeting? Like, how much optimism is there that an agreement or some sort of consensus can be reached?
I think there's cautious optimism. As with any conference of the parties, there's a lot of negotiations, a lot of challenging discussions that occur during the first 2 weeks. But then the last couple of days, you see this mad flurry of activity as people rush to get to some sort of agreement so they can leave the conference of parties with at least some progress being made. We saw that just last month at Sharm el-Sheikh on the climate COP, where in the very last moment, they came up with a big new landmark deal on loss and damage payments. I'm hoping that there's cautious optimism here that after all the discussions that come this weekend and early next week, that we'll land at something that will help move everything forward.
Well, setting targets is one thing, implementing them is another, right? For instance, one of the key proposals in this global biodiversity framework is to protect 30% of global land and water by 2030, which is pretty controversial because some would say it's too ambitious. And of course, some indigenous people worry that this could lead to them being evicted from their homeland. So what do you make of this 30 by 30 goal, and what does it really mean in practice?
Well, I'm excited about the 30 by 30 goal. It truly would be historic and landmark and would set the world on a pathway towards really healing the planet and being a foundation towards sustainable development. Yes, if protection is done as it has in some places in the past, it's controversial, but I believe that those that are trying to negotiate towards the 30 by 30 target have learned from the past. This is not about evicting people from their lands. In fact, indigenous peoples and local communities are fundamental to achieving 30 by 30. They are and have been environment's first defenders, right, throughout history, right? In fact, they know how to live on their land and their waters and manage them in a manner that helps sustain not only their livelihoods, but also sustain biodiversity. And so 30 by 30 will only be successful to the degree that it actually supports and respects indigenous peoples and local community lands. I see them as this is a great chance for those two communities to come together. So it is ambitious, but I believe it can be done. It can be done in a manner that is just for the planet and just for people.
Protecting land and water, that's an important part of your work at World Resources Institute, right? I know you've been working on a series of projects in this regard. What do you think is the most challenging part or the most difficult part in pushing these initiatives forward?
I think the most challenging part is that the issues are all interrelated, right? In fact, the quest for protection will not succeed unless we also think through the quest for production. And so to the degree that the human quest for food does not get onto a sustainable pathway, we will consistently fail in our quest to also protect nature. And so I look at this agenda as not just being about protection, but I see this agenda as a produce and protect agenda. We need to figure out how to shift the food system such that we can get more from less, right, to feed a growing population nutritiously, which then creates the space for the protection as well as the restoration that's needed also to ensure integrity of our ecosystems.
It said that the Earth's biodiversity is declining faster than ever before. But if you look at human history in the past several hundred years, especially post-industrial revolution, is it fair to say that this is an unavoidable byproduct of human development?
I wouldn't say it's unavoidable. We could have, depending upon how humanity actually develops. And I think it's right for humanity to develop, right? Everyone wants to have a better life, more secure life, healthier life, more income, longer lifespans, etc. The quest for development is is fair and fine and totally understandable. So it's not the question of the what, it's the how we go about doing it. And since for many generations, humanity has been developing in a manner that is sacrificing natural ecosystems and the biodiversity they support to get there. I believe our analysis shows that one can actually drive economic development in a manner that has low impact on the environment, can actually be nature positive, and is low carbon. And that's the shift we need to do. So I don't see an unavoidable, inevitable conflict between development and biodiversity. I think it's completely possible to have development with biodiversity.
That's no easy task, right? It seems to me that it's always hard to strike a balance. For example, we know that another key target in this biodiversity framework is to end subsidies for those industries that may contribute to biodiversity loss. But I heard that this is another sticking point in negotiations. Is that correct? How much political will is there to support this target?
Yeah, subsidy reform has been on the agenda for a long time, in the climate agenda as well as in the biodiversity agenda. And you're right, it is politically tricky, right? There are those who benefit from the way that the financial subsidies actually flow today. I don't know the prospects for subsidy reform coming out of this CBD, but what I do know is that the solution might not be ending subsidies per se, but rather shifting the flow of subsidies. Instead of subsidizing activities that lead to the drawdown of natural capital, rather shift subsidies, which may actually end up going to some of the same players, to farmers, land managers, you name it, but to shift those subsidies to reward for behaviors and practices and approaches that actually stop the decline in natural capital, actually increase natural capital. And so, to me, we've seen in some places around the world, there's examples in Europe, New Zealand, a few other places where the government didn't eliminate the subsidy. They actually just transformed what the subsidy is for and what's required to get there to make it into a green subsidy from a brown subsidy. That, I believe, might have political traction, because you still would then have interests that would benefit from this, and it makes it then aligned not only with environmental integrity, but also with the human quest for development.
Well, the countries you mentioned just now are all developed countries, right? For developing countries, it looks that the cost is always the biggest obstacle, isn't it? It looks that governments are often reluctant to invest in projects aimed at conserving biodiversity. And also, we know that countries like Brazil and some African nations, they've been asking for some financial support. But I'm wondering if there's a way to make protecting biodiversity financially beneficial.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that one. One is, what we need to have is systems of evaluation and market pricing that actually reflects the full value of nature and natural ecosystems. So you get kind of a full cost accounting, right? So therefore, yes, doing unsustainable things can be, on the surface, appears to be cash-wise less expensive. But what's missing from that is all the what's so-called negative externalities, the negative financial impacts of the drawdown of natural capital, the impact on biodiversity, the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, et cetera, that actually do have financial costs that just are not reflected yet in the market transaction. So you have these hidden costs that really make the unsustainable activities actually more expensive. So we need to reflect that. And government policies can play a role in doing that, or new markets for ecosystem services can help reflect that role. Secondly, besides making the detrimental things more expensive by reflecting the full costs, we can proactively drive investment and financing towards those activities that actually help restore and protect nature.
Back to the COP15 meeting, because China currently hosts COP15 presidency. How would you describe China's performance in leading and facilitating the negotiations?
I think China's done a masterful job of managing this COP. It's been challenging, right? China took on this COP and then COVID hit. And so this has been kind of an extended COP through the COVID period. You've had a part 1 meeting, and now we have the part 2 meeting here in Montreal. So hats off to China for managing this in such unexpected and historic conditions. I think there is a lot of momentum. This is one of those landmark CBD, Climate Conventional Biodiversity COPs. It's one of the most important ones. I think China has done a very good job of keeping it on the agenda. It could have just slipped away under COVID and then lost all attention. But China kept it on the top of the agenda, kept it there. The fact we're having this COP now in 2022 years later tells the commitment of China on this issue and of ensuring a successful COP. So I think China does a fantastic job, and I just hope that China will do what it can to ensure that we end this week with some landmark agreements.